It was a crisp Monday morning at Riverside High, the kind of school where teachers hurried between classrooms, clutching coffee cups, and students shuffled through hallways half awake. The smell of floor polish hung faintly in the air, a smell few noticed, but one man took pride in. That man was Calvin Turner, the school janitor. In his late 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind square glasses, he moved through the halls with quiet purpose. To most, he was invisible. The man who fixed leaky faucets, changed bulbs, and swept up forgotten paper scraps. But Calvin didn't mind. He believed dignity came from doing a job well, no matter what the job was. As he polished the trophy case outside room 204, voices drifted from inside, the sound of laughter, sharp and unkind. "Can you believe it?" a teacher's voice said. "The janitor told me he used to study philosophy." Philosophy? I mean, come on. He's scrubbing floors for a living. Another laugh followed. "Maybe he's writing a dissertation on mops." The class chuckled. Even Miss Davis, the young literature teacher, laughed a little too loudly. Calvin froze. He hadn't meant for anyone to overhear that part of his life. The years he'd spent in college before dropping out to care for his sick mother. He still loved books, still read Aristotle and Baldwin on his lunch breaks, still believed education wasn't about degrees but about heart. But hearing his life turned into a punchline still stung. He finished wiping the glass and quietly wheeled his cart away before anyone noticed him. That afternoon, as Miss Davis walked out of her classroom, she nearly bumped into him near the library. "Oh, Mr. Turner, I didn't see you there," she said with a forced smile. Calvin returned it politely. "No harm done, Miss Davis." She hesitated, her guilt pricking. "I hope the students didn't bother you earlier." He looked at her, calm, composed, his voice steady. "Oh, they didn't, ma'am. But you might have." Her face flushed. "Oh, I didn't mean—" "I know," he said gently. "Most people don't." She didn't know what to say. He nodded politely and walked away, his cartwheels squeaking softly against the linoleum floor. That night she couldn't sleep. His words, quiet but pointed, replayed in her mind. Most people don't. She thought about her students, her classroom, her own pride, and she had no idea that the man she had mocked would soon change the way she and the whole school thought about learning, humility, and what it really means to be educated. Because in just a few weeks, when the new principal arrived, Calvin Turner's quiet wisdom would find its way into the one place no one ever expected, the very heart of the school's leadership. 2 weeks later, Riverside High buzzed with news. The school had a new principal. The previous one had retired, leaving behind years of dusty policies and uninspired leadership. Rumor had it the new principal, Dr. Elaine Porter, was sharp, young, and determined to shake things up. Her first day began like most others: meetings, introductions, polite smiles. But as she walked through the corridors, clipboard in hand, she noticed something others didn't. The floors gleamed, the air smelled clean, and the bulletin boards were perfectly aligned. Small details, but signs of care. When she reached the teacher's lounge, she overheard a conversation. "That janitor," one teacher was saying, "is everywhere. You'd think he owns the place." Someone laughed. "Yeah, old Mr. Turner probably knows this school better than anyone." Dr. Porter raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Turner?" The room fell silent. "Oh, the janitor," another teacher said quickly. "He's been here forever. Nice guy. Keeps to himself." She smiled. "I'd like to meet him." Later that afternoon, she found him outside the library, repairing a flickering light. "Mr. Turner?" Calvin turned, wiping his hands. "Yes, ma'am. You must be the new principal." "I am. Elaine Porter." She extended her hand, and he shook it gently. "I wanted to thank you. The school looks incredible. You clearly take great pride in your work." Calvin smiled modestly. "I do my best, ma'am. The students deserve a place that feels cared for." That answer stopped her. Most people would have said, "It's my job." But his tone, calm, thoughtful, carried something deeper. As she looked closer, she noticed a worn book tucked into his cart. The Republic by Plato. "You read philosophy?" she asked, curious. Calvin chuckled softly. "Used to study it. Didn't get the degree, but the lessons stuck." Dr. Porter smiled. "Well, I'm impressed. Not every day you meet someone who quotes Plato between light bulbs." He laughed quietly. "Plato said, The beginning is the most important part of the work. I figure that applies to clean hallways and young minds alike. Her eyebrows lifted. That's remarkably insightful, Calvin shrugged. Life's a classroom if you're paying attention. Dr. Porter found herself nodding. Would you mind if I stopped by sometime, maybe to talk more? I could use another perspective around here, someone who sees things differently. He smiled. I'm always here, ma'am, usually with a mop or a book. She grinned. Then I'll bring the coffee. That evening, as she left the building, she passed Ms. Davis, who was walking toward her car. How's your first day, Dr. Porter? She asked. Enlightening, the principal said. I met the wisest man in the building, and he's not on the payroll as a teacher. Ms. Davis frowned slightly. You mean Mr. Turner? Dr. Porter smiled. That's right, I think I just found my first advisor. Ms. Davis drove home that night with a heavy feeling in her chest, a mixture of shame and curiosity. She'd laughed at the man the new principal called the wisest in the building. And for the first time, she began to wonder if she had something to learn from him, too. Over the next month, the new principal's office light often burned late into the evening. But Dr. Porter was never alone. Sitting across from her, still in his work clothes and holding a cup of black coffee, was Calvin Turner, the janitor everyone had once overlooked. At first, their meetings were casual. She'd ask for his thoughts on student morale or staff relations, and he'd offer a quiet, thoughtful answer. But over time, those chats grew into something deeper, an unlikely mentorship built on respect, curiosity, and genuine understanding. One evening, Dr. Porter sighed, pushing aside a stack of disciplinary reports. These students are slipping through the cracks, she said. Fights in the cafeteria, skipped classes, parents unresponsive. I feel like I'm running uphill. Calvin nodded, leaning back slightly. You ever ask them why they're fighting? I get excuses, she said. Bad home life, no interest, too much stress. He smiled faintly. Sounds like reasons, not excuses. The difference matters. She tilted her head. Explain. Calvin rubbed the back of his neck. When I was their age, I had to leave school to take care of my mother. Teachers said I was wasting my potential. But I wasn't lazy. I was trying to survive. Most of these kids aren't bad. They're just unheard. You want to fix discipline? Start by listening. Dr. Porter sat in silence, his words hitting harder than any seminar or training she'd attended. You really should have been a teacher, Mr. Turner, she said softly. He chuckled. Maybe I am, just without the classroom. Word spread quickly that the principal often consulted the janitor, and at first it raised eyebrows. Some staff whispered behind closed doors. Why is she listening to him? What could he possibly know about administration? The loudest critic was Ms. Davis, the literature teacher who'd once laughed at him. She couldn't stand seeing Calvin, mop in one hand, wisdom in the other, treated like an equal among professionals. One afternoon, she cornered Dr. Porter after a staff meeting. With all due respect, she began, I think it's unusual to take management advice from a janitor. It sends a confusing message to the staff. Dr. Porter didn't flinch. It sends the right message, she said calmly. That wisdom doesn't depend on titles. Ms. Davis reddened. But he's helped me understand this school better than anyone here, the principal continued. You teach literature, don't you? Then maybe you'll appreciate this. Sometimes the most profound stories come from the margins. Ms. Davis had no answer. A week later, the school hosted its annual Career Day, an event meant to inspire students with stories of success. Speakers included doctors, engineers, and a local politician. But Dr. Porter added one more name to the list, without telling anyone. When the students gathered in the auditorium, she walked on stage with a microphone. Today you'll hear from people in many professions. But I want to start with someone who knows what it means to work hard, to learn from life, and to find wisdom in unexpected places. Please welcome Mr. Calvin Turner. The room fell silent. The janitor? The students exchanged puzzled looks as Calvin walked up to the stage, wiping his hands on his coveralls. But as soon as he spoke, the silence became something else. Respect. He didn't talk about success or money. He talked about purpose, about showing up, about finding pride in every task, big or small. Books can teach you, he said, his voice steady and deep. But so can struggle. So can failure. Every floor I mop teaches me patience. Every day I come here reminds me that learning never ends. Not for you, not for me, not for anyone. When he finished, the applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous. Students stood. Teachers stood. Even Miss Davis, eyes damp, clapped hardest of all. And somewhere in the crowd, Dr. Porter smiled quietly to herself. Because in that moment, everyone saw what she had seen all along, that the wisest man in Riverside High didn't wear a tie or hold a degree. He carried a mop, a mind full of philosophy, and a heart full of grace. The next morning after career day, Ms. Davis lingered in her classroom long after the final bell. The applause from the auditorium still echoed in her mind, but louder than that was Calvin's voice. Steady, wise, and impossible to forget. Every word he'd spoken had peeled away a layer of her pride. Books can teach you, but so can struggle. Learning never ends. She, a literature teacher, had spent her career telling students about humility and truth. Yet she'd mocked the man who lived those lessons every single day. When she finally found the courage, she went looking for him. She spotted Calvin near the gym, fixing a broken railing with his usual quiet focus. "Mr. Turner," she said softly. He looked up, offering that same calm, patient smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Davis." "I wanted to talk to you," she said, hesitating. "About yesterday. About before that, actually." He set down his wrench. "Go on." She took a breath. "When I laughed at you in front of my students, I was wrong. You didn't deserve that. I thought I was smarter, better because I had degrees and a title. But yesterday, I realized how much smaller that made me." Calvin listened quietly, his expression kind. "It takes a big person to say that." She shook her head, eyes misting. "No, it takes someone you taught. I've spent years teaching books about wisdom, but I've never met someone who lived it like you do." He smiled softly. "You don't owe me anything, Ms. Davis. But if you really want to make it right, do what I try to do. Teach them to see people, not positions." She nodded, swallowing her guilt. "I will." Just then, Dr. Porter approached, holding a small stack of folders. "Mr. Turner, I was hoping to find you both," she said cheerfully. "We've got a new mentorship program starting, and I think you'll both want to hear this." They followed her into the teacher's lounge, where she spread out the documents. "The district approved my proposal. It's called Riverside Voices. It's a mentorship network, not just for students, but for faculty too. A place where we learn from each other, no matter our roles." Calvin raised an eyebrow. "That's quite an idea, ma'am." Dr. Porter smiled. "Actually, it's your idea, Mr. Turner. You said once that life's a classroom if you're paying attention. I think it's time we make that official." Ms. Davis looked at Calvin, a small, humbled smile on her lips. "I'd like to be part of it," she said quietly. Dr. Porter nodded. "Good. You'll lead the first group, together." Calvin blinked. "Together?" "Yes," Dr. Porter said, grinning. "You'll mentor each other. She'll teach the literature. You'll teach the life." Calvin chuckled. "Fair trade." Ms. Davis laughed softly through her tears. "More than fair." Weeks passed, and the program took root. Teachers, janitors, cafeteria workers, even bus drivers met weekly to share stories, advice, and experiences. The students began calling it the circle, and in the middle of that circle, always, was Calvin, listening, smiling, reminding everyone that every voice mattered. One afternoon, Ms. Davis stood at the podium of a small assembly. Her eyes found Calvin in the back, leaning on his broom like a staff. She spoke with conviction. "The greatest teacher I've ever met doesn't stand in front of a classroom. He walks these halls. And because of him, I finally understand what education truly is. Not about who knows more, but about who grows more." The crowd applauded warmly. Calvin nodded once, quietly proud but humble as always. When it was over, she walked up to him. "You know, Mr. Turner, I think you've taught me more in a few months than all my years of college." He chuckled. "Then I guess my tuition's paid." She smiled, with interest. That evening, as the sun sank over Riverside High, Dr. Porter watched from her office window. Students laughing, teachers talking, the janitor sweeping the halls that now gleamed brighter than ever. Learning never ends, she whispered to herself, and the best teachers don't always stand at the front of the room. Because in that school, respect had taken root where mockery once lived, and at its heart was a man with a mop, a mind full of wisdom, and a soul that had quietly changed them all. Months turned into a year, and Riverside High had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The halls still echoed with the usual sounds, ringing bells, slamming lockers, laughter, but beneath it all was something new, something deeper: respect. Students greeted janitors by name now. Teachers shared lunch with cafeteria workers. Every morning, the staff gathered briefly for the circle, a moment to exchange a quote, a story, or simply gratitude. It had started as an experiment, but it became a tradition. At the center of it all, as always, was Calvin Turner. His mop bucket was still the same, but his purpose had grown far beyond it. To the students, he was Mr. T, the wise man with stories that always seemed to fit whatever they were going through. To the staff, he was the soul of the school, the quiet counselor who reminded everyone that titles didn't define worth. Even Ms. Davis had changed. Her classes were livelier now, not just about novels and poems, but about life, compassion, and perspective. She often quoted Calvin's sayings between lessons. Her students began to notice, and one day, a girl asked, "Ms. Davis, why do you always talk about Mr. Turner like he's your teacher?" She smiled. "Because he is." One afternoon, the school board came to visit. They were considering nominating Riverside High for a district award, Most Improved Campus Culture. The members toured the building, shaking hands, asking questions. When they asked Dr. Porter what had caused such a dramatic change, she smiled and gestured toward the hallway. "It wasn't me," she said. "It was him." Calvin looked up from his work as the board approached. His mop paused mid-swipe. "Afternoon, folks." The lead board member smiled politely. "Dr. Porter tells us you've played a big role in transforming this school. May we ask how you did it?" Calvin chuckled softly. "Didn't do much, sir. Just listened more than I talked." The man smiled. "And what did you hear?" Calvin leaned on his mop handle, eyes kind but thoughtful. "People wanting to matter. That's all any of us want, really. Kids, teachers, janitors. We all need to feel seen. Once that happens, everything else falls in place." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the board members, an older woman, wiped her eyes and said quietly, "You should be standing at the podium, not sweeping under it." Calvin smiled. "Ma'am, the podium doesn't shine without someone sweeping under it." That line would end up being quoted in newspapers a week later when Riverside High won the district award. But for Calvin, it was just another day's truth. That evening, Dr. Porter called him into her office. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a small framed certificate. It read, "To Mr. Calvin Turner, mentor, philosopher, and the heart of Riverside High." He smiled softly, eyes misting just a little. "You didn't have to do this." She shook her head. "No, Calvin, we needed to." He laughed. "Well, I guess I'll have to hang it next to the mop rack," she chuckled. "Or above it, where it belongs." That night, as Calvin made his final rounds, the empty hallways glowed under the soft hum of fluorescent lights. He paused outside Ms. Davis's classroom, her desk lamp still on, a stack of essays before her. She looked up and smiled. "Still working, Mr. Turner?" "Old habits die hard," he said. "You too, huh?" She laughed. "Grading papers, as always. You know, I assigned my students an essay today. The person who taught me the most." "Sounds like a good topic," he said. She smiled gently. "You'd better be ready for a lot of reading." Calvin chuckled, shaking his head. "That's your class, Ms. Davis. I just keep the floors clean." She looked at him, eyes full of warmth. "No, Mr. Turner. You keep the hearts clean." He didn't respond, just smiled and tipped his head in thanks before continuing down the hall. The next morning, as sunlight spilled across the front steps of Riverside High, students filed in, laughing and talking. Calvin stood by the entrance, holding the door open like he did every day. "Morning, Mr. T," they called out. He nodded, greeting each one with a smile and a kind word. "Morning, kiddo. Big test today, huh? You got this." Dr. Porter watched from the window above, smiling to herself. There he was, the man who had quietly rebuilt her school, one act of grace at a time. Because sometimes the greatest teachers don't write on chalkboards or hand out grades. Sometimes they sweep the floor. And in doing so, they sweep away our ignorance, our pride, and everything that keeps us from truly learning. And as the day began, Calvin Turner, the janitor, the philosopher, the mentor, picked up his mop, humming softly, content in the knowledge that his classroom was everywhere.